thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And it's always a pleasure to be in Paris in spring. So I'm going to present you some recent work on the evolution of recombination. So first, a little bit of biological background. As most of you probably know, sexual reproduction is widespread among eukaryotes. So most organisms reproduce sexually, at least at some point of their life cycle. And sex in eukaryotes is characterized by two complementary events, which are meiosis and fertilization. And you probably also know that during meiosis, the maternal and paternal chromosomes come together, and they form these junctions called chiasmata, where recombination may occur. And so when recombination occurs, it will lead to these crossovers, so these exchanges in parts of chromosomes. So here we see one, and here there are two.
Sorry to interrupt, but we don't see the slides.
You don't see the slides.
No. Well, we see them, but in the very, very back.
So I don't know what. Should I have started a Zoom session here, maybe, or no? Okay.
Behind the.
I'm seeing the slide.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
It's okay. Okay, so let me know if there's a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so about these crossovers, in most species there is at least one crossover per chromosome, but there may be more than one. I will go back to that. So then the cell divides into two, and then the two chromatids of each chromosome separate, and the cells divide again to form the gametes. And as you can see, these two processes of recombination and segregation of chromosomes generate quite a lot of genetic diversity among the gametes. And so with sex, all the offspring produced will be genetically diverse. It's interesting to note that there is actually quite a lot of variability in the rate and position of these crossovers along the chromosomes. And this can be observed at different scales. So between species, for example, there are some big patterns like in fungi, there is typically a lot of recombination, also in social insects, but also between closely related species, there may be important differences in recombination rates. Also between populations of the same species, and even between individuals from the same populations. For example, in humans, we know that there is genetic variation for recombination rates. Between the sexes, so typically the males and females, in males and females, the patterns of recombination are often different, and also between the different regions of the genome. So here I'm showing you a classical example from two closely related Drosophila species, Melanogaster and Mauritiana. So these Drosophila have 4 chromosomes, but the 4th chromosome is very, very small, and it's not shown here. So we see the 3 other chromosomes. And here, the length of the bar corresponds to what we call the genetic map length of the chromosome, which is simply the average number of crossovers occurring at meiosis on these chromosomes. And although the physical length of the chromosomes is similar in the two species, you can see that the map length is bigger in Mauritiana, so meaning that there are more crossovers, more recombination in Mauritiana. And this is another example. So this time comparing two populations of the same species of Drosophila and showing that there is a higher rate of crossovers in one population than in the other. And there are actually many other similar examples. So there is quite a lot of variation for recombination rates, and recombination evolves sometimes quite fast. And so we may wonder, what are the selective forces that may drive this evolution of recombination? So first, there may be direct forces that are due to direct fitness effects of the number of crossovers per chromosome. In particular, we know that in many species, at least one crossover per chromosome seems to be required for meiosis to proceed normally. And on the other hand, it also seems that too many crossovers may be detrimental, because then it's difficult for the chromosomes to segregate. So presumably these direct forces, so these mechanical constraints, should generate some form of a stabilizing selection around an optimal number of crossovers per chromosome. But it's not completely obvious to see why these constraints should differ between populations or between species. And then there may also be indirect forces that result from the effect of recombination on genetic variation. And so this relates to the classical idea that sex and recombination are beneficial because they generate genetic variation. So indeed, we know that natural selection relies on genetic variation. And therefore, the idea is that by increasing variation, sex and recombination will increase the efficiency of natural selection. So this is actually an old idea that goes back to the 19th century. And it generated quite a lot of theoretical work since the 60s. And all this modeling work showed that, in fact, this idea is really not trivial, because in some cases, indeed, recombination may help adaptation, but not necessarily always. So sometimes recombination will break beneficial combinations. But just to make a long story short, what these models have shown that, at least in the case of finite populations, so when you have a finite number of individuals, it will be generally true that recombination will favor adaptation. So it will generally increase the rate of fixation of beneficial alleles and increase the efficiency of selection against deleterious alleles. So to explore that, many authors have used these so-called recombination modifier models that typically consider three loci, so three genes, two loci affecting the fitness of individuals, and a third locus which affects the recombination rate between the two fitness loci. And so using this kind of model, you can explore in which conditions the allele that increases recombination, say the little m allele, will increase in frequency in the population. So these models have generated many very important insights, but they also have a number of limitations. So in particular, many of these models are haploid models, meaning that they assume that natural selection occurs during the haploid phase of the life cycle, while we know that many eukaryotes are diploid. So like us, we have a long diploid phase with 2 copies of each chromosome. And also, it's not always clear how the results from these models can extend to more realistic scenarios with many selected loci along a whole chromosome or a whole genome. So in order to explore these questions, I also started from a 3-locus model in diploid organisms. So we have 2 chromosomes. Again, 2 loci affecting fitness. So here by fitness, I will go back to that, but I simply mean the fecundity of individuals, with 2 deleterious alleles, little a and little b, that reduce the fitness of the individual by a factor 1 minus s when homozygous. And then we have a dominance coefficient h that determines the fitness effect in heterozygotes. So in all the following, I will assume that these mutations have independent effects on fitness, meaning that the fitness of the individual is simply obtained by multiplying these 2 contributions. I've also considered possible interactions among the deleterious alleles, but I won't have time to talk about that. And then we have this 3rd locus, so which will affect recombination, where the little m allele increases recombination by an amount delta R AB. And we also have a dominance coefficient HM associated with this little m allele. Okay? Yes?
H is between 0 and 1?
Typically, yeah, you could imagine situations where, for example, H is above 1, so for the deleterious alleles, we would call that under-dominance, or below 0, so you would have an heterozygote advantage in the case of the fitness loci. But here, I will consider that it's between 0 and 1. So the life cycle is a typical White-Fisher model. So we have discrete generations and a finite population size that stays constant at n individuals. And these individuals will produce a very large effectively infinite number of gametes. And so each individual will contribute to this gamete pool in proportion to its fitness. So during this phase, we have selection and recombination going on. And then these gametes will fuse at random to form also a very large number of diploid zygotes. And finally, among all these zygotes, N will be sampled at random to form the next generation, okay, which corresponds to a genetic drift. So we also need to include recurrent mutation towards the deleterious alleles, so which occurs at a rate U per generation. Otherwise, the deleterious alleles will just disappear from the population. So here it doesn't matter very much when exactly mutation occurs, but we can say it occurs during the production of gametes. And then, because the gametes fuse at random, it will be easier to describe the population at the gametic stage, because we only have 8 possible types of gametes, while we have, I think, 36 possible diploid genotypes. And so we can describe the population by these 8 gamete frequencies, which sum to 1. So we have 7 independent variables. But actually, it's often more useful to use a different set of variables, which are the frequencies of the 3 alleles, little m, little a, little b, and what we call linkage disequilibria that measure how these alleles are associated within the gametes. So for example, the linkage disequilibrium here between the 2 deleterious alleles is simply defined as the frequency of gametes with both deleterious alleles minus the frequency of little a times the frequency of little b. So when this DAB is positive, it means that the 2 deleterious alleles tend to be found together in the same gametes, while when it is negative, it means that they tend to be in different gametes. Okay. And we also have this more complicated 3-locus disequilibrium, but I will come back to it a bit later. So these 7 variables are random variables, and the general method will be to write recurrence equations that describe changes in moments of these random variables from one generation to the next. But when you do that, typically you find that these moments will depend on higher order moments. And so you end up with an infinite system of recursions. But actually, so I don't really have time to go into the details, but it's possible to show that this system can be closed under the following assumptions. So I will assume that selection against the deleterious alleles is weak. I assume also that the recombination rates are also small. So this is not, in fact, a necessary assumption, but it just simplifies the algebra. And then I assume that the modifiers of the effect of the recombination modifier, the deleterious mutation rate, and the effect of drift, which depends on 1 over the population size, are smaller. And so when this is the case, so first the deleterious alleles will stay at a low equilibrium frequency because selection against them is stronger than mutation and drift. So they stay at this low frequency, and then all the changes in allele frequencies will only be driven by the effect of the modifier and by drift, but which are small. So the allele frequencies will change slowly in the population. While the linkage disequilibria tend to be broken by recombination, which mixes the genotypes. And because recombination rates are higher, the linkage disequilibria change on a faster time scale. And so you have a separation of time scales here between these variables. And you can express the moments that involve linkage disequilibria at a quasi-equilibrium state in terms of the allele frequencies. And I will show you some examples just a bit later. Okay, so first I will show you results in the additive case, so meaning that the deleterious alleles, so the fitness of the heterozygotes for deleterious alleles is exactly intermediate between the 2 homozygotes, so H is 1/2. So in that case, a classical result is that the two deleterious alleles tend to be on average in negative linkage disequilibrium. So they tend to be more often in different gametes or different genomes than in the same genome. And that's something called the Hill-Robertson effect. So how does this work? This effect is generated by the stochastic variance in the linkage disequilibrium. So due to drift, sometimes you have positive and sometimes you have negative linkage disequilibrium. And this can be represented by this moment here. So this expected squared linkage disequilibrium, which under our assumption is approximately given by this expression here. So where PA and PB again are the frequencies of the deleterious alleles, but which under our assumptions again should stay close to the deterministic mutation selection equilibrium. Okay, so we have this variance, and then it will in turn generate other moments. So the averages of PA DAB and PB DAB, which are negative and also involve the effect of selection, as shown here. So what this shows is that when the linkage disequilibrium is positive, it means that the two deleterious alleles tend to be together, and so selection against them is more efficient because they are in the same genome, and therefore they tend to decrease in frequency. While when they are in negative linkage disequilibrium, they are in different genomes, and so selection is less efficient, and they tend to be maintained at higher frequencies. And so this is what generates this negative covariance between allele frequencies and the linkage disequilibrium. And these moments in turn generate the Hill-Robertson effect, so the negative linkage disequilibrium, which can be understood similarly. So when the two deleterious alleles are together, so when D is positive, they tend to be lost from the population because selection against them is efficient. While when you have negative linkage disequilibrium, selection is less efficient, and so the deleterious alleles can persist longer in the population. And because of that, on average, you have a negative linkage disequilibrium. So deleterious alleles, again, are more frequently in different genomes than in the same genome. So putting everything together, we obtain an approximation for this negative linkage disequilibrium. And then this will generate selection for increasing the recombination rate, because by increasing recombination, it will tend to break this negative linkage disequilibrium. And so to put together the deleterious alleles and to better eliminate those deleterious alleles. And this will be represented by other moments that involve the modifier locus. So like this 3-locus linkage disequilibrium, so that is generated by the effect of the recombination modifier. And here this simply represents the fact that so initially we have this negative linkage disequilibrium, so an excess of these two combinations, and recombination will tend to break this excess, and so to put together the deleterious alleles. And because the little m allele recombines more, it will tend to be more associated with big A, big B, and with little a, b combinations than the big M allele that recombines less. Okay, I hope this is clear. And this is what this 3-locus association represents. So little m is more associated with these genotypes and big M with these genotypes. And because of that, selection is more efficient in individuals carrying little m, and so there will be fewer deleterious alleles associated with little m, which is in turn represented by these pairwise linkage disequilibria, which are negative, and which will favor the little m allele, so little m will tend to increase in frequency. Okay, so this is negative, this is positive, these are negative, and this is positive. So we have selection for increased recombination due to this stochastic effect. So again, we can put everything together, and so we have an expression for the advantage of recombination due to this negative linkage disequilibrium, which involves this function of scaled recombination rates, so recombination rates divided by selection. Okay, so this seems good. But in fact, when you analyze the model, you find that it's not as simple as that. And actually, there are many other mechanisms that in this three-locus model that generate selection for recombination. And here I've tried to represent all these mechanisms in this figure, which may look a bit scary. But the mechanism I explained you before is this path here on the left. So it generates negative linkage disequilibrium and then selection for recombination. But as you can see, there are also many other paths involving other moments that do not involve the average linkage disequilibrium and that also generate selection for recombination. It's possible to give an explanation for all these paths, but I will not inflict you this. But the important thing is that all these different mechanisms select also for recombination. And so they will also lead to a term similar to this one, but with different functions of scaled recombination rates. Yes?
Quick question.
Yeah.
But does this mean that this approximation is only part of the formula?
Yes. So yeah, it's I should have thought there are mathematicians in the room. So it's not really correct because it's only the contribution of the average linkage disequilibrium. But the true result, so the true change in allele frequency, involves other terms that correspond to these different paths. Yeah. So I should have written a correction. So it takes a similar form, but with a more complex expression of these scaled recombination rates. Okay, so that was in the additive case. And now we can see what happens when we introduce dominance. So in particular, we know that in general, the deleterious alleles tend to be partially recessive, meaning that the fitness of heterozygotes is usually closer to the wild-type homozygote than to the mutant homozygote, like here. So meaning that H is typically less than 1/2 for deleterious alleles. And the effect of these dominance interactions is that it generates frequency dependence in the effect of selection against deleterious alleles. Because as the deleterious alleles become less frequent in the population, they will be less frequently present in the homozygous state. And so selection against them will tend to be weaker because they will be more present as in the heterozygous state. And so if we repeat the preceding analysis, but for H between 0 and 1, so for the average linkage disequilibrium, we obtain a similar term as before, but now we have an extra term that represents this effect of frequency dependence. And you can see that if H is less than 1/2, this term is opposite in sign, so it tends to oppose the Hill-Robertson effect. So the way I understand this is that when the two deleterious alleles are together, so they tend to be more efficiently eliminated and they decrease in frequency. But now, if they are partially recessive, selection against them becomes less and less strong as they decrease in frequency. And so this frequency-dependent effect tends to oppose the Hill-Robertson effect. And actually, what this formula tells us is that it can even reverse it. So if H is less than 1/4, the whole thing will become positive. And now you have positive linkage disequilibrium. So I did simulations that confirm this result. Here we see the average linkage disequilibrium as a function of the dominance of deleterious alleles. And so the curves correspond to this approximation, and the dots are two-locus simulation results for different recombination rates. And as you can see, the simulations confirm that when H is below 1/4, we have positive linkage disequilibrium between our deleterious alleles. And so from this, we may expect that when H is below 1/4, we may have selection against recombination now because everything is reversed. But interestingly, it turns out that it's not the case because this frequency-dependent term will actually appear on several of these paths as shown you. So we saw that it appears here, also here, and there are also new paths that are generated by these frequency-dependent effects. that I have not shown on this figure. And sometimes the effect is positive and sometimes it's negative. And remarkably, overall, for many parameter values, these effects tend to compensate each other. And so you find that you still have positive selection for recombination, and that the overall effect of these frequency-dependent terms is often rather small. Okay, so these are the main results of this 3-locus model, and I wanted to show you. So then I tried to extrapolate these results to the more realistic case of a whole chromosome with where deleterious alleles can occur anywhere with a given mutation rate big U per generation. So again, the chromosome has a genetic map length R, which is the average number of crossovers at meiosis. And for simplicity, I assume that these crossovers can occur anywhere. So the number is sampled in a Poisson distribution, and they can occur anywhere with the same probability. And again, I introduced this modifier locus with an allele little m that increases this average number of crossovers by a given amount delta R. And here the idea is that I simply use the results from the 3-locus model, and to obtain the overall strength of selection for recombination, I will simply integrate this result over all the possible positions of deleterious alleles along the chromosome, meaning that I only take into account the effect of interactions between pairs of deleterious alleles. And so when you do that, you end up with an expression like this. So that's the strength of selection for increased recombination. So from the expected change in frequency divided by the genetic variance. And it involves this integral over all possible positions of the deleterious alleles. So in fact, there are two functions. So it's a sum of two functions. So for when the two alleles are on the same side of the chromosome, and for when they are on opposite sides relative to the modifier locus. And interestingly, what you can see is that the strength of selection against deleterious alleles only occurs here in this upper integration limit. And actually, if we plot this function of scaled recombination rates, so that's for the case where the two deleterious alleles are on both sides of the modifier locus. So you see that when at 0, it means that all 3 loci are exactly at the same place on the chromosome. So in that case, it does not generate selection for more crossovers because it will not increase their recombination rate. But as they move apart a little bit along the chromosome, it will generate selection for increased recombination. And then as they are very far away, selection will diminish because they already recombine at quite a high rate. And actually, if this upper limit is large, so if R is large relative to SH, one may approximate this integral by the same integral between 0 and infinity, which is approximately 1.8. And so in that case, we get a very simple approximation for the strength of selection for recombination that only depends on the chromosomal mutation rate, the chromosome map length, and the population size. So this population size, in fact, should really be the effective population size that determines the effect of drift. And we know in particular that in such a model with recurrent deleterious alleles, the selective death of individuals tends to reduce this effective population size. So that's something called background selection, but which has been well described before. So there is already an expression for the effective population size in this model. That also depends on the deleterious mutation rate and the chromosomal map length. Okay, so then I tried to test these results by doing individual-based simulations. So simulating the same genetic settings, so with individuals carrying 2 chromosomes with deleterious alleles and a recombination modifier locus. So at this locus, in the simulations, I have many types of many mutations that can occur and that will code for different numbers of crossovers on the chromosome. And so I can let the population evolve. So in these simulations, I've also introduced an inherent cost of recombination. So by assuming that the crossovers are costly, and so fitness decreases as you make more crossovers. So this was mostly to stabilize the number of crossovers in the simulations. So here, this parameter C would be a sort of a fitness cost per crossover. And then you can predict what will be the evolutionary stable map length, so the number of crossovers to which the population will evolve, which will be the value of R, at which selection for recombination exactly balances the cost of recombination. Okay, so either from this simple approximation or from the more exact expression here, which involves integrating numerically this function. Okay, and this shows some results. So here on the y-axis, we have the evolutionary stable map length on a log scale as a function of the deleterious mutation rate per chromosome and for different fitness cost of crossovers. So the dots are simulation results. The solid curves are the results from the numerical integration over the chromosome. And the dashed curves are the results from the simpler approximation that we've seen that converges to the same value when recombination is sufficiently high. So as you can see, it fits rather well, so which is satisfying, at least as long as recombination is sufficiently high. When recombination is lower and when you have many mutations, then it works less well. So presumably because when you have many mutations and not too much recombination, then you start to have higher order interactions between 3, 4 or more deleterious alleles, which are not taken into account in this analysis. So this shows that when you increase population size, you have less selection for recombination. And that's expected because these stochastic effects that generate selection for recombination will be less strong in a bigger population. And this shows the effect of the strength of selection against deleterious mutations. And so the simulations confirm that it doesn't affect too much selection for recombination as long as this fitness effect is sufficiently small. Okay, so I've also explored other things using this model, so the effect of having several loci selecting for recombination or several chromosomes. But I don't really have time to show you these results, but they are shown in this paper. And just to finish, I wanted to briefly mention the work of a PhD student working with me, Roman, who extended this model to the case of partially selfing organisms. So indeed, in many plant and animal species, you have hermaphroditic individuals that produce both male and female gametes. And you can have fertilization between 2 gametes produced by the same parent, which is what we call selfing or self-fertilization. And actually, some species self-fertilize at a high rate. And so Roman introduced a given rate of selfing, sigma, so a new parameter in this model. And it makes sense to explore the effect of selfing because there are data actually showing that there is a relation between selfing and recombination. So these are, I don't really have time to go into the details, but these are data we collected from different genera of plants some time ago, showing that in more highly selfing species, there tend to be more crossovers per chromosome. So there is a pattern here that needs to be explained. And so it's interesting, but unfortunately, I don't really have time to explain you all the details, but selfing actually generates many different effects that affect selection for recombination due to the fact that selfing increases the homozygosity and generates correlations in homozygosity in individuals. And so the overall result is that when selection against deleterious mutations is sufficiently weak, you predict that as you increase the selfing rate, you select for more recombination. but it's not always the case. So in particular, when selection against deleterious allele is stronger, selfing may decrease selection for recombination. And so if you're interested, you can check this paper that recently came out in bioRxiv. Okay, and to conclude, so we have seen through this model that sometimes simple extrapolations from 2 and 3 locus models may correctly approximate more complex multi-locus dynamics, at least in some cases. So here we assume that deleterious alleles always stay close to this deterministic equilibrium. So when it's not the case, in particular when the mutations are more weakly selected, they are more subject to drift, then other methods will need to be developed to treat these regimes. And concerning selection for recombination, so we've seen that it's possible to obtain simple approximations that just depend on the deleterious mutation rates, effective population size, and map lengths. And now we are working at trying to incorporate more biological realism into these models, in particular taking into account the fact that in general the distribution of crossovers is not uniform along chromosomes, and also that there are some interference phenomena that tend to lead to some spacing between the crossovers along the chromosomes. Okay, and I will stop here and be happy to take questions.
Okay, so, okay.
Thank you. So I have a question about the modifier locus. Why it's a locus? Is it motivated by biological particularities, or can it does it make sense to think of a modifier trait, or yeah, you mentioned at the end that it might be several alleles. So
it's a good question. So yeah, you may see it first as a modeling trick, but in fact there is more biological reality than that, because I was mentioning at the beginning that there is quite a lot of genetic variation for recombination rates, and so for example that you can see between species or within species, and for example. So this was an old observation from Drosophila, but recently, I don't have the reference here, but a few years ago, people have managed to find the genetic cause of this difference in recombination rates, and it's caused to a mutation in a given gene that will affect the molecular mechanisms of meiosis. And there are other examples, for example, during selection experiments where you observe that recombination rates have changed during the experiment, and this is a genetic response. So sometimes, and we know, so most often we don't know the mechanism, but we know that some modifier exists, sometimes that change recombination over a whole chromosome or whole genome, and sometimes they may have a more local effect as well.
But like a major response.
Yes, there are sometimes it's like here, it's just one locus that causes the change.
Okay, thanks.
So are there other questions?
Is it a surprising result that the selection is still positive for S arbitrarily small? Or is it expected?
So it's expected from the model as long as you stay in the hypothesis of the models, which is that S is still stronger than 1 over n. And in the simulations, so for the values I've used, so here, for example, you have n 10,000, and so it's actually the SH product that determines, because the mutations will be most often heterozygous. So here on the left, we approach 1 over n. But then the thing is that if I decrease S further, then selection becomes inefficient against the deleterious alleles. And in my setting, so because it's an infinite site model, the mutations start to spread, and I have many mutations, and so the program just has to stop, because And so here we enter a regime where deleterious mutations accumulate, so which may not seem very, so perhaps it happens in some small and endangered populations, but otherwise it doesn't seem very realistic. And so I think perhaps to approach these regimes, we need to also to include more realism in terms of the effect of mutations, to taking into account the fact that there may be compensatory mutations, so there may be interactions between mutations, so that even in this regime, the fitness may not just fall continuously. But it's, at least with the tools I'm using, it's a bit difficult to explore these regimes. But it would be really interesting to do so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe last question.
Could you just clarify why your method doesn't work when you have weakly selected mutation with partial genetic linkage? Is it mostly due to this genetic linkage?
Yes, so
because you always suppose that selection was weak, right?
So it's not. You mentioned here, for example.
No, it's just like the last slide. You said
this
that,
one. Yes.
Your method didn't work anymore when you had.
When the strength of selection becomes of the same order as drift. So here, yes, it's because I'm always assuming that the mutations stay in low frequency, and actually this is what allows me to close my system of recursions, because all the term in I will neglect all the term in frequency squared by assuming that this frequency remains small. And so if this frequency does not stay small, so which may happen when you have when drift becomes important, my method does not work anymore.